take a look at some of the stories and how the climate is affecting our planet. And we begin in Australia, where this year's poll in Australia was dubbed as a climate election. For a country that has seen the worst of flood, wildfire and droughts, this is an urgent issue, and Australians agree. One of the reasons Prime Minister Anthony Albanese was elected was this. He had made tall promises to tackle climate change, and it seems like he has followed through. Within a month of taking office, his administration has nearly doubled the emissions reduction target. The previous Conservative government of Scott Morrison had set the target around 26%. So now, by 2030, Australia will have to cut its emissions to 43%. This is an ambitious promise, but the road ahead is difficult, to say the least. Albanese faces a thorny dilemma. You see, Australia wants real steps to combat global warming, but the country depends on exporting fossil fuels, which is one of the main reasons behind this temperature rise. Fossil fuels account for about a quarter of Australian exports. Even domestically, about 70% of electricity comes from coal and gas. So once again, it is an economy versus climate debate. It will be interesting to see if the new government manages to find a middle ground. Australia's own contribution to global emissions is negligible, a little over 1%, but it digs up large amounts of fossil fuels that is exported and then burned overseas. There is no exact estimates, but some reports suggest that it could lead to anywhere between 3 to 5% of global emissions. If this is taken into account, it makes Australia one of the world's largest carbon polluters. This is dividing the Australian Parliament. Most want to have a cleaner future, but every party is offering a different road to achieve it. The Green Party has presented radical energy reforms. It says you cannot end climate wars by opening new coal and gas mines. The leading Labour Party seems to be prioritising the economy. It has pledged support for 114 new coal and gas projects.
And to the royal family in this, their time of grief. That takes a certain humility, as well as a...
And for more on this, we are being joined now by Terence Jaya Retnam, who is an environmental engineer by profession. He is a partner with EY's climate change and sustainability team in Melbourne. Welcome to the program. Anthony Albanese had taken office with a promise to strengthen country's climate policies, and within a month he has doubled the emissions reduction target. This is a double of what was promised before. How do you think the government plans on achieving this?
So the emission reduction target was based on 2005 levels. It was to reduce to 26 to 28% by 2030. The Albanese government has increased that and just sent the new target through to UNFCCC of 43%. So it's a 15 percentage point increase on the previous 26 to 28. So if you go from 28 to 43, it's 15 percentage points. So it's not quite double. It's about 50% more reduction. And I believe the main approach to managing to get to this target is to increase the renewables in the electricity grid. So take on more renewables projects and bring forward some of the coal plant shutdowns would be the main approach. So previously, the renewables in the grid was targeted at 69% renewables by 2030. Now there's talk of getting to about 82% renewables by 2030.
Terence, Australia wishes to bring real steps to reduce global warming, but the country heavily depends on exporting fossil fuels, which leads to temperature rise. So how will Canberra combat this dilemma?
That's a really good question. I think the only way to address that is to reduce fossil fuel consumption globally. So where countries are starting to reduce their own emissions, so if we look at emissions reduction in, say, China or India, and if we're exporting coal or gas to these countries, they've also got net zero targets. India's got a net zero 2060 target, so does China. And so those targets will help reduce the amount of importation of fossil fuels. Australia's predominant exports are fairly clean coal. But that said, I do accept that it's a much broader problem than our own consumption of fossil fuels. It's also the export, and that can only come down through reduction in other countries. So long as there's demand for fossil fuels, I believe the private sector will continue to export.
Terence, a month ago, the Australian polls were termed as climate elections. In the past, stronger climate policies have made it into manifestos. But do you think this year was a major turning point?
I believe so, and I think it was called the climate election. So climate has been one of the top 5 issues in the past 3 to 4 elections. So it has continued to be on the radar. But I think it really changed the voting this time around. It changed the voting to vote in or vote out the previous party based on their climate targets and ambitions, but also voted in a number of independent parliamentarians who have climate as one of their main policy areas. So there were about 5 or 6 what we call teal candidates elected, just on the basis of an independent commission and climate change. And some of the candidates ended up winning seats from very significant Liberal Party members. So it really was a very big change. And I believe the change has come mainly because of the extreme weather that we're seeing all around the world. But Australia's had major bushfires and major floods and major dry seasons, droughts as well. And I think that people are now starting to connect the climate impacts to the weather impacts that we're seeing on the ground. And that has translated into a climate election and votes for more ambitious climate policy.
Terence Jayaretnam, thank you very much for making time and for talking to us today. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.